hour. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Dr. Michael Greger coming to you live from my treadmill for a very exciting webinar. One of my favorite things in the whole wide world is to be proven wrong, and boy, did this topic do it. If you were like me, get ready for a 180 in your thinking. This was originally part of my Preserving Your Teeth chapter in my upcoming book, How Not to Age, but had to be cut due to space constraints. The book was supposed to be 600 pages, but I wrote over 2,000 pages with 13,000 plus citations, so I had to cut more than half the book. And so this fluoridation section got axed, but you are all going to get to see it right here, right now. But first, some quick housekeeping logistics. As I mentioned the last two times, Zoom has changed their default view. So if when the videos are playing and you want to maximize the video, there's a little gray vertical bar between the video and the panelists. You can click and drag over, or you can click on the view in the upper right and maximize the video. Don't want you to miss anything. If at any time you run into technical difficulties, there are live chat Zoom staff standing by. Let me put that in the chat here. Okay. I just put the URL in the chat for everybody. If they are unable to help, we have Nutrition Facts staff standing by too, and I will paste how to get a hold of them in the chat as well. Please reserve the Q&A button that you see in the Zoom window to ask content questions, as opposed to technical difficulty kind of things. Today's webinar is only an hour, but I've reserved some time for Q&A at the end. So feel free anytime any questions come up to just type in. You don't have to wait till the end. And then the Nutrition Facts team will compile some of the most kind of common questions, and I will answer them at the end. Don't have to worry about taking notes or anything after the webinar is over. Not only going to send you a full recording of it, but also a free link to download all the videos in high def so you can see the videos in all their full resolution glory. The first video today is water fluoridation effective? In other words, does it work to reduce tooth decay? Let's find out. All right, let me just make sure I got all my settings right now that I'm coming back on board here. I think this should work. All right, let's do this.
A meta-analysis of all the studies on the dental health implications of vegetarian diets showed significantly fewer decayed teeth, missing teeth, and the number of teeth with fillings. One of the studies that bucked the trend and showed that vegetarians had more cavities blamed the excess decay on the fact that vegetarians were significantly less likely to choose fluoride-containing toothpaste, supported by the fact that those who did use toothpaste with fluoride had significantly fewer decayed teeth than those who didn't. Fluoride is thought to protect teeth by improving the intrinsic stability of the mineral structure of dental enamel. A recent meta-analysis from nearly 100 randomized controlled trials of fluoride toothpaste involving more than 10,000 people found high certainty evidence that toothpaste containing the typical amount of fluoride reduces tooth decay significantly more than non-fluoride toothpaste in both children and adults. But what about the addition of fluoride to the water supply? A medical consensus of public health authorities around the world has considered water fluoridation at appropriate levels as a safe and effective means to prevent cavities on a community-wide scale. In fact, the CDC, the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention, deemed fluoridation of drinking water as one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century. However, community water fluoridation has long been a flashpoint of polemic and polarization. Anti-fluoridation activists underscore that there's no human dietary requirement for fluoride and argue that water fluoridation isn't effective enough to justify the costs, which may include health risks. First, some background before I dive into the controversy. Fluoride is a mineral element in the Earth's crust that naturally occurs in most water supplies. This is one of the reasons fluoridation has withstood constitutional challenges. Courts have ruled that rather than an added medication, fluoride can be seen as a nutrient found naturally in some areas, but not others, and fluoridation of water supplies is a matter of just leveling the playing field, particularly for poor communities who may have limited access to dental care. Fluoridation can be defined as the upward or downward adjustment of the level of fluoride content in drinking water to an optimal level, just enough to prevent cavities, but not enough to cause fluorosis or cosmetic changes to the teeth. It all started in 1901 with an investigation into Colorado brown stain, grotesque brown stains on the teeth of Colorado Springs residents. At the same time, teeth afflicted by the condition were surprisingly and inexplicably resistant to decay. After fluoride was identified as the basis for these changes, a nationwide survey of fluoride levels in drinking water in the 1930s led to the discovery that fluoride could reach levels around 1 part per million without causing serious fluorosis. Hoping to get the best of both worlds, Grand Rapids, Michigan, in 1945, became the first city in the world to fluoridate its water supply. Within 11 years, cavity rates among children in Grand Rapids was reportedly down more than 60%, and a fluoridation movement was born. Today, about 24 countries fluoridate their drinking water. Dozens of others have naturally fluoridated water, or instead add fluoride to milk or table salt. Fluoridation pushback started almost immediately in the United States. The obsession of Dr. Strangelove's Colonel Ripper with the purity of his precious bodily fluids was based on real-life right-wing Red Scare conspiracy theories that fluoridation was meant to produce moronic atheistic slaves who would bow to the communists. Today's social media is also rife with anti-fluoridation messages. Studies have found that 63% of Instagram posts regarding fluoride could be classified as anti-fluoride, 64% of tweets on Twitter, 99% of YouTube videos, and up to 100% of fluoride groups and pages found on Facebook were anti-fluoride. Years before COVID, the anti-fluoridation crusade was considered a case study of digital pandemics of public health misinformation. In the year before COVID, the first worldwide survey of the crisis of confidence in science of 140,000 people in 140 countries found that only 18% of humanity appeared to have a high level of trust in science. To my pleasant surprise, though, despite so many institutional failures, a 2020 follow-up of the study found trust in science actually increased after COVID. Where does the science land on water fluoridation? First, let me address efficacy. The CDC attributes the steep decline in dental decay in the United States in the latter half of the 20th century to water fluoridation. But similar declines were noted in non-fluoridated countries, attributed in large part to the widespread global distribution of fluoride toothpaste. The best evidence we have comes from prospective studies with concurrent controls comparing cavity rates over time in fluoridated versus non-fluoridated populations. There have been more than 100 such studies to date, and overall, fluoridation results in 35% fewer decayed, missing, or filled baby teeth, and 26% fewer decayed, missing, or filled permanent teeth. So, community fluoridation does indeed help to cut down on cavities. The question then becomes, at what cost? Which we'll discuss next.
Okay, like everything in medicine, it's a matter of balancing the risks and benefits. Talking about the benefits, water fluoridation really does seem to cut down on cavities. What are the risks? Well, I'll start with a discussion of something I briefly mentioned called fluorosis. This should do it.
Fluoride research over a half-century historically established water fluoridation to be safe when used at typical fluoridation doses of 1 part per million. However, naturally fluoridated waters up around 2 parts per million can put children under the age of 9 at increased risk for dental fluorosis, and a lifetime of drinking water at 4 parts per million can cause skeletal fluorosis and increase the risk of bone fractures. You can see these kinds of levels in the Earth's natural fluoride belts that extend from Turkey through Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan to China and Japan. The reason susceptibility to dental fluorosis ends at around 8 years old is that that's when enamel maturation is completed before our final permanent teeth finish erupting. After teeth are formed, dental fluorosis can no longer develop or worsen. At 1 ppm, 1 part per million of fluoride, public health authorities estimated that less than 10% of kids would develop the condition, and only in its mildest forms. We've since learned that the prevalence and severity of fluorosis is much higher than predicted. According to the CDC, about a third of American children now have some form of dental fluorosis, with about 1 in 30 experiencing a moderate or severe case. This may reflect exposure to multiple fluoride sources not factored into the original calculations. Now, most fluorosis is so mild as to be hardly noticeable, taking the form of white streaks or splotches visible only to dentists under the bright lights of their exam chair. But serious cases can involve severe pitting and discoloration, and present more than just a cosmetic defect. For example, one study found that children with severe cases are more likely to be viewed by their peers as less attractive, less careful, less clean, less happy, less healthy, less intelligent, less kind, less reliable, less social. Imagine what that could do to a kid's self-esteem. Given the higher-than-expected rates of fluorosis, in 2015 the U.S. Public Health Service reduced the recommended fluoride concentration of drinking water down to 0.7 parts per million across the board. Previously, levels were set at up to 1.2 ppm in cooler areas where people tend to drink less water. This change would be estimated to keep the percentage of those developing fluorosis of aesthetic concern down to approximately 12%. In terms of other health concerns, until recently, mainstream medicine's view might have perhaps best been summed up by the final statement in an exhaustive report published by Consumer Reports in 1978. Quote, "The simple truth is that there is no scientific controversy over the safety of fluoridation. The practice is safe, economical, and beneficial. The survival of this fake controversy, in the Consumer Union's opinion, is one of the major triumphs of quackery over science in our generation." Unquote. In the last few years, though, there's been growing concerns about the adverse effects of fluoride on brain development, which I'll address next.
There's my typical cliffhanger, which is no problem in a webinar setting, because I just zip on right to the next one. All right, so cosmetic defects, one thing, obviously. But what's this about effects on brain development? Is water fluoridation safe or not? Let's find out.
Fluoride had been found to be a developmental neurotoxin in rats and mice, leading to learning and memory deficits, which led to an interest in studying human populations. Starting in the 1980s, reports started appearing in Chinese medical journals that found correlations between areas naturally containing higher fluoride levels in water with lower intelligence among children. Dental fluorosis, the fluoride-induced tooth mottling, is widespread in China, with more than 90 million residents affected, often in small pockets surrounding particular small springs or mountain sources. Researchers took advantage of the fact that even adjoining neighborhoods could have widely different fluoride exposure, setting up a kind of natural experiment. Due to limited access to Chinese journals at the time, these studies largely escaped the attention of scientists in the West, until a meta-analysis of 16 such studies was published in English in 2008. Fluoride and Children's Intelligence, a meta-analysis, found that children living in areas prone to fluorosis had 5 times higher odds of developing low IQ than those living in areas with little or no fluorosis. So here we were thinking dental fluorosis was just a cosmetic blemish, but it may instead be a visual indicator of intellectual deficits. A subsequent meta-analysis in 2012, including about 10 more studies, found that the average intelligence gap between high and low fluoride exposure areas was about 7 IQ points. By far the largest study, involving thousands of children, found that even at fluoride levels below 1 ppm, higher fluoride levels were associated with a large drop in the chances of developing excellent intelligence, defined as an IQ of 130 or higher. Even very mild fluorosis was associated with less than half the odds of reaching such a high IQ. By now, there have been more than 50 studies showing an association between higher fluoride exposure and lower IQ. In the latest systematic review meta-analysis, 90% of the studies published in the last 10 years reported a link between high fluoride exposure and reduced intelligence. However, serious caveats are in order. First, The fluoride concentrations in most of these studies were well above fluoridation levels. In the 2012 meta-analysis, for example, one study clocked concentrations as high as 11.5 ppm, far exceeding the U.S. target of 0.7 parts per million, as well as the average concentration in the United States, which is around 0.8 ppm in municipal water and 0.3 ppm in well water. Now, to be fair, the 11 ppm in the meta-analysis, that was an outlier. The average elevated level was only about 2 parts per million, and most found associated IQ decrements below the EPA's upper limit, its maximum contaminant level goal of 4 ppm, which is supposed to represent the level below which there is no known or expected risk to health. Some studies showed lower intelligence with fluoride concentrations even down at 1 to 2 ppm, with one estimate suggesting the smallest harmful concentration, potentially shaving off a single IQ point, would be down around 0.3 ppm, assuming you drink 4 cups of water a day, while others suggest it's too early to be able to calculate a threshold for human neurotoxicity due to insufficient available data. The second major caveat is confounding, and nearly all the studies to date have been performed in rural communities in countries like China, Iran, Mongolia. Areas within these countries with unusually high fluoride levels may be particularly poor and underdeveloped, since relatively rich communities may be more likely to invest in higher quality drinking water that filters out fluoride, if only to reduce dental fluorosis. High fluoride water may also be more likely to be contaminated with other neurotoxins. Fluoride exists in water as a negatively charged particle. To maintain electroneutrality, this may pull into the groundwater positively charged particles such as aluminum, arsenic, lead, or mercury. This doesn't happen in community water fluoridation, since the negative fluoride ions are balanced out in the water treatment process. Finally, most of the older studies were cross-sectional and ecological, meaning they looked at a snapshot in time of group-level data rather than individual exposures over time. Just because a child with low IQ lives in a high fluoride area doesn't necessarily mean they or their mom actually drank the water, for example. Ideally, we'd be able to measure individual exposure levels and then follow the kids over time to see if those with higher exposure really do grow up with stunted intellects. And that's exactly what we'll cover in my next video, entitled Why I Changed My Mind on Water Fluoridation.
Okay, so growing evidence is that this could be an issue for fetal development, but all the studies could be rightfully criticized for their various limitations. But then, dun 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 dun, the Canadian study came out. Check it out.
Community water fluoridation recently hit its 75th anniversary, touted as a significant advancement in public health, but new research suggests the potential for adverse health impacts. There's little question that supplemental fluoride strengthens teeth and reduces decay, but at what cost? Most of the older studies were snapshot-in-time studies, looking only at group-level data or were based on higher-than-normal exposure. This has since changed with the publication of prospective studies following individual exposure levels from mother-child pairs over time. The first few were from Mexico and correlated higher fluoride levels in the urine of pregnant women with future developmental delay in their infants. They found worse cognitive performance at age 4 and lower IQ from ages 6 through 12. But the fluoride was from fluoridated salt or water sources where fluoride was present naturally. Then this study came out of Canada, the first prospective study using individual exposure data dealing directly with community water fluoridation, receiving quote-unquote optimally fluoridated water. None of the municipal water fluoride levels exceeded 1.5 parts per million, and the vast majority, over 90%, were under the U.S. target of 0.7. Despite drinking optimally fluoridated water, the study of more than 500 mother-child pairs found that higher fluoride exposure during pregnancy once again appeared to translate into lower child intelligence, measured at ages 3 to 4. The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists recommends pregnant women drink at least 8 cups of water a day. Based on the Canadian study, following this advice with water at U.S. target fluoridation levels might result in as much as a 5-point loss in IQ. The Canadian study was published in the American Medical Journal Association's Pediatrics Journal, the longest-running pediatrics journal in the country. The editor-in-chief defended its decision to publish the study, quote, as testament to the fact that JAMA Pediatrics is committed to disseminating the best science, regardless of how contentious the results may be, unquote. The Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health issued a rapid response report concluding that there is insufficient evidence to conclusively conclude that fluoride exposure at optimum levels affects neurological development, but that's not what the Canadian study was saying. The researchers just suggested the possible need to reduce fluoride intake during pregnancy. As the accompanying editorial concluded, based on the new data, a dispassionate and tempered discussion of fluoride's potential neurotoxicity is warranted. What was the response from U.S. regulators? Within a month of the Canadian study's release, the National Toxicology Program, which is part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services that evaluates substances for potentially harmful human health effects, released a draft evaluation of fluoride exposure and neurodevelopmental and cognitive health effects, and concluded that, quote, based on a systematic review of the evidence, the NTP concludes that fluoride is presumed to be a cognitive neurodevelopmental hazard to humans, unquote. So we've gone from dismissing people who question the safety of water fluoridation as zealots or anti-science fanatics, to the official U.S. National Toxicology Program saying we should presume it's hazardous. Now, this was just a draft report. To ensure the integrity of its report, the NTP asked the National Academies, probably our most prestigious scientific institution, to review it. The review raised a bunch of concerns, which was portrayed in the dental literature as discrediting the IQ research, but that's not what the National Academy said. They explicitly said that their misgivings don't mean that the NTP conclusion that fluoride should be presumed to be neurotoxic is incorrect. They just wanted some further analysis. So in 2020, they redrafted their draft and once again came to the same conclusion, presuming it's a cognitive neurodevelopmental hazard based on the extent, consistency, and robustness of the IQ data. The National Academies then re-reviewed their redrafted draft, concluding it's much improved, but urged the NTP to further improve the clarity of the document, and we await the final NTP report.
Okay, so that really does change everything. Now, in the book, that's where the section ended. But I was so interested to see how the medical and dental professions would react to this total 180 among regulators, from presumptively safe to presumptively dangerous. So, bonus video, before I take questions, how did the medical profession respond to the changing fluoride science? Let's find out.
The National Toxicology Program is part of the Public Health Service, in partnership with the CDC, FDA, and NIH, dedicated to the analysis of agents of concern to identify any toxic effects. How did the medical community respond to the draft conclusions in a recent systematic review that concluded that fluoride is to be presumed to be a cognitive neurodevelopmental hazard to humans, based on studies showing lower IQ scores among kids with higher fluoride exposure? What do you do when current research contradicts public practices, when new evidence doesn't conform with existing beliefs? Well, health authorities have continued to conclude that fluoride is unequivocally safe, despite the new studies in recent years linking fluoride exposure in pregnancy with adverse effects on fetal brain development. There are still papers on how to sell fluoridation of the water supply, targeting social media and the person-to-person spread of fluoride misinformation. Search engines are to be encouraged, at the very least, to flag search engine results that point to water fluoridation health misinformation suggesting adverse effects. In promoting support for community water fluoridation, maybe we don't even want to proclaim its safety for fear of raising questions about risks. I mean, if you're saying it's safe, then that begs the question, well, is it not safe? Maybe we shouldn't even talk about whether it's safe. The tendency to ignore new evidence that does not conform to widespread beliefs may be impeding our response to early warnings about fluoride as a potential developmental neurotoxin. But some are just so fixed in their views on fluoridation that they won't reassess their stance no matter what the latest research might show. Ironically, it was the anti-fluoridationists who were accused of their anti-scientific attitudes, but now it's the pro-fluoridationists. One of the most facile pro-fluoridation arguments I ran across is the suggestion that fluoride can't be hurting IQs, because over the last half-century of fluoridation, IQ scores have been going up rather than down. The jaw-dropping irony is that a substantial part of that rise may have been due to the removal of another neurotoxic element, lead. It's worth remembering that the science surrounding the neurodevelopmental hazard of low-level lead exposure was also bitterly contested, using the same kind of arguments we see today in the fluoridation debate. A few short years before leaded gas was effectively banned in the United States, a meta-analysis of lead exposure in child IQ only found 24 human studies, all cross-sectional, with a typical associated loss of intelligence of about 4 IQ points. The current data suggests a similar IQ loss from fluoride from an even stronger body of evidence. A spokesperson for the American Dental Association responded to the new data, pointing out that some cities that have ended water fluoridation saw an increase in cavities. OK, but that's kind of a strange response to data suggesting the potential for permanent brain damage in children. I mean, I know they're the Dental Association, but how could they so easily ignore the serious red flags of potential neurotoxicity for cavity reduction? This is not to say tooth decay isn't a serious health issue, but there are ways to get the cavity-preventing benefits of fluoride without the risks. Since the primary benefits arise from topical contact with our enamel, but the primary risk arise from systemic absorption, we can follow Europe's example and safely reap the rewards using fluoride toothpaste and mouthwashes. In Europe, 98% of the population drink unfluoridated water. Several countries, including France, Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, banned fluoridation decades ago in favor of fluoride toothpaste. As more than 10 years ago, the official Scientific Committee on Health Risks of the European Union concluded that topical application of fluoride is most effective in preventing tooth decay, and there appears to be no obvious advantage in favor of fluoridating the water supply.
Okay, so best of both worlds can be gained by topical application of fluoride. So I continue to use and advocate the use of fluoride toothpaste, but pregnant and breastfeeding women may want to consider non-fluoridated water sources to reduce the apparent risk to the developing brain. All right, Q&A time. I'm sure there's lots of juicy questions out there. Let me just give our Nutrition Facts staff 5 minutes to compile the most commonly asked questions, and then I will be right back. Okay, we got lots of juicy, wonderful questions. Let's do this. Number 1 on the list is, are these potential harms only relevant for children, or do adults need to be careful with fluoride too, such as non-childbearing age adults? And the answer is we don't know. In fact, I think there's only been 2 adult studies ever. And so all we know is that it appears to be, so when I say neurodevelopmental hazard, we're talking about, as it sounds like you understand, we're talking about the formation of brains in utero and probably during breastfeeding as well. And so once you already have your brain, is fluoride toxic? The answer is we just don't know. I mean, there's just not enough data out there. I mean, I can certainly understand people are like, well, look, lead's bad, lead's bad for baby brains, lead's bad for adult brains. Fluoride might be bad for babies' brains, or maybe it's bad for adult brains too. That's possible. But we just, we don't have good data to support that. It would all be speculation at this point. Now you'd think, though, maybe we should actually fund some studies. What do you think? Anyway. All right, are carbon filters or other water filtration systems, for that matter, capable of removing or reducing fluoride from drinking water from the tap? Was the best source of water or filter without fluoridated bottled water? The best source is spring water, safe alternative to fluoridated tap water. So yeah, most filtration systems are not going to get rid of fluoride. Although it's possible that reverse osmosis systems will. And the bottled water, spring water, depends on the source, right? Remember, fluoride is a natural constituent of water supplies around the world. And so, well water has, 0.3, parts per million on average in the United States. Some's higher, some's lower. That's not fluoridated. That's just seeping fluoride from the element from the Earth's crust into the water table. So the bottled water may not have intentionally added fluoride in it, but it might naturally have fluoride in it. Same thing with spring water. Turn off screen share. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The next question was turn off screen share so we can see you on the full screen. Okay, there we go. Good. Okay. What about chlorine? What about chlorine in water? Especially excessive amounts used for old pipes is the fluoro plus chloro. The combo is especially bad. Well, I've got a video on at least that. I'm gonna copy paste it. Check this out. We have this new fancy shortener, C.NF/water. So now you don't even have to memorize it or click on it. SEE.NF/water is the video where I talk about chlorination byproducts and the increased risk of bladder cancer. So how much bladder cancer and why? But the irony is we're trying to make the water safer from a bacteria standpoint, but can actually make it less safe from a kind of chemical safety standpoint. But there's a way to get clean water without using chlorine, but it is expensive. Anyway, okay, so it's a fascinating video. So check it out. I don't talk about fluoride there, but I do talk about the chlorination byproducts, which are indeed a concern. And I talk about how regular carbon filters, activated charcoal filters like Pure and Brita and refrigerator filters and stuff can actually reduce some of those chlorination byproducts. Okay, next up, the type of fluoride utilized in toothpaste is different than the type utilized in drinking water. So is there a difference in side effects? It's probably the fluoride. So we think it's the fluoride, not the so if it's sodium fluoride, we don't think it's the sodium that's doing it, we think it's the fluoride. So fluoride, so regardless of what kind of fluoride salt is used, when you stick it in water, it should just ionize into fluoride and cause whatever things it causes. So I would assume it would be the same, although I didn't run across any studies either way. Does fluoride negatively affect bones? Does it make bones brittle? That's what I was talking about, skeletal fluorosis. I think it was the second video where I talked about fluorosis, which is, usually just that modeling of the teeth, but at high levels, you can get skeletal fluorosis. And I actually talk about someone who drank too much tea, 20 bags of Lipton, iced tea a day, and had got so much fluoride that she actually had skeletal fluorosis. And so at really high levels, yes, it can affect your bones. Okay, next question. Does fluoride build up cumulatively in our body to create toxicity? How long does it take for added fluoride to flush out of our body system? Fluoride can just flow right through us unless it becomes incorporated into bone, or in the case of your teeth, the enamel. But the reason you don't have to worry about dental fluorosis after the permanent teeth come in is because it's only incorporating that fluoride when the teeth are being formed. When the teeth are formed, then no longer you can have as high fluoride as you want. You're not going to affect that kind of modeling, but your bones are being remodeled all the time. You're making bones, breaking down bone all the time. And it can incorporate some of the fluoride. And so in that way, you can kind of build some up. Lead does the same thing. In fact, I have a whole series of videos on lead talking about how one of the reasons we don't want breastfeeding women to be losing weight is because not only all these toxic pollutants build up in their body fat, which come roaring out into their bloodstream and end up in their breast milk, but also as they're we're going to lose bone mass, and the loss of bone mass will release lead. That'll get in the breast milk too. Okay. Fluoride-free toothpaste contains titanium dioxide. I understand it's not a safe ingredient. Are there any ingredients in fluoride-free toothpaste that we should avoid? I'm sure not all fluoride-free toothpaste contain titanium dioxide. It's just used to make things look white. And I know there's lots of toothpaste that don't go out of their way to make things look bright. But titanium dioxide should only be a problem if you actually swallow it. So for example, use topically. It's one of the two safe sunscreens because it doesn't get absorbed through the skin. And so as long as you're not drinking it or eating it, it shouldn't be a problem. But I do have a video about titanium dioxide in terms of as a food additive to make like candy white and things. So you can check that out on NutritionFacts.org. Oh, in terms of other ingredients, SLS. Wasn't that? I do have a video talking about sodium lauryl sulfate. Oh, okay, here, let's, well, here, I'll just share the regular URL. So sodium lauryl sulfate, I talk about how it's kind of a detergent that can hurt your gums. And then I talk about, well, there's all this not in the SLS free toothpaste. There's another compound that's used that gives you the same problems. And so you ideally would have a toothpaste with that either. Good luck finding that. Okay. Is xylitol okay in toothpaste? Yes. Just don't let your dog eat it. Is erythritol safe and better than fluoride in toothpaste? Well, erythritol is safe and better than xylitol. I actually just did a video about that recently. But the erythritol it does interfere with growth of those bad bacteria, and so can decrease risk of cavities, but is not considered a substitute for fluoride. And what about hydroxyapatite? Not something I looked into. Do children need fluoride toothpaste? And if so, starting at what age? Are kids safe from fluoride-induced neurotoxicity after a certain age? The reason why, there's all these instructions how you want to have a pea-sized amount of toothpaste and be very careful and, monitor, supervise kids when they brush is because we don't want them swallowing too much fluoride. And so all those caveats, along with all those caveats, as long as they're spitting it out, we don't have to worry about their brains. Any insight on tooth remineralization powders containing ground cloves and calcium carbonate as dental alternative fluoride treatments for cavity prevention? That sounds fishy. Never heard of such a thing. Sounds fishy, but I didn't run across any science either way. Caldwell Esselstyn, dun, 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 has been saying that fluoridated water and toothpaste destroy those wonderful bacteria on our tongue that convert nitrates to nitrites. I could not find such evidence. If that were true, that would be a significant strike against it, but I could not find evidence that it hurts those good bugs. And we can help those good bugs with tongue cleaning, tongue scraping. I have a video about that. Okay. Are there potential neurodevelopmental effects beyond reduced IQ, other neurological conditions? That's a good question. One would assume so. So IQ is kind of used as a kind of general cognitive indicator. But, so if it hurts IQ, it's hurting all sorts of aspects of cognition. But that's the only one that's really been kind of validated. And so we really don't know, but I would not be surprised. Something's bad for the brain is bad for the brain. Any thoughts on glass isomers, restorative material that releases fluoride slowly as a filling? What's the safest type of filling? Well, so I am certainly no expert in this area. In fact, I only know of two kinds of fillings: composite fillings and the amalgam or mercury fillings. And so I would. The downside of the amalgam fillings is mercury, obviously, and the downside of the composite fillings are BPA. that Plaxis compound. I'd rather have BPA in my system than mercury in my system, but maybe there's some glass isomer one that I've never heard about. I do not know, but that sounds like a good video, actually. Although I've never been offered that in a dentist, so if you can't really get it, I don't know what the point is, but maybe that's the wave of the future. Are those who eat a lot of fruit at higher risk for tooth decay? No, but they are at higher risk of hurting their enamel, which is that extra hard layer on the outside of your teeth. It can erode away. You can get enamel erosion if you eat sour foods and beverages without rinsing your mouth out with water afterwards. That's the critical piece. If you eat all the fruit you want, all the sourness you want, drink that hibiscus tea, chew on raw cranberries, whatever you want, stuck on a lemon, but got to rinse your mouth out with water to get those acids off your teeth. And critically, you don't want to be brushing afterwards because your teeth are in a softened state, and then you're going to be brushing off your enamel. So rinse with water, wait at least an hour afterwards before you brush your teeth. All right. Oh, this is after eating something sour or acidic. Same thing like apple cider vinegar, a diluted apple cider vinegar. You want to rinse your mouth out with water afterwards. Okay, how crucial is it to get oral care products that are certified by the ADA, the American Dental Association? Now, I assume I don't know what their criteria are. I assume they don't certify any like toothpaste if it doesn't have fluoride in it, but I don't know if they have any other criteria than that. What do I suggest for drinking water while traveling? So again, what we know is the concern during pregnancy. What if you're pregnant and drinking water while traveling? If you're traveling 100% of the time, then there's really not much you can do, presumably, to have control over your water supply, since you can't even get water onto an airplane, right? It's not like you could bring water with you. And I don't think there's like some pocket filtration system. So, I just wouldn't worry about it when you're traveling, because people typically travel a very small percentage of the time. But yeah, if you were on the road forever, I do not know what you would just probably be exposed to a lot of fluoride, unless you were traveling anywhere else in the world where basically they don't fluoridate their water. What about green tea? I understand most teas contain a high fluoride concentration than a higher fluoride concentration than fluoridated water. That's why I recommend green tea as mouthwash. Partially because of its fluoride content, partially because it decreases the growth of cavity producing bacteria. But you can overdo it. And so, I have a video talking about how much tea is too much from a lead standpoint, depending on whether you buy it from China or Japan, whether it's black or green. I have a video about that. So I'd have to see if those kind of the highest levels of tea consumption you would run into fluoridation. For people that basically drink tea instead of water. So that's a good question. And I bet in my Skeletal Fluorosis tea video, I talk about how much is actually in tea, so you can kind of run the numbers yourself. Okay, what are our thoughts? What are your thoughts that some dentists recommend not to use toothpaste at all because toothpaste is abrasive to teeth? Well, I assume the abrasiveness of toothpaste is on purpose to try to get that plaque off. But the most important thing you can do to prevent cavities is not eat added sugars, right? If you look at the skulls of people that lived 1 million years ago, guess what? And they had no toothbrushes at all, no toothpaste. Guess what? Basically no cavities. How is that even possible? Floss wasn't invented. Well, guess what wasn't invented? Candy bars weren't invented, right? Cavities have one and only cause, and that is added sugars. And you can prove this or all sorts of ways. There was like when we had the wartime deprivations, when all of a sudden people couldn't get sugar, cavity levels plummet. But even like down like 1, 2, 3% of calories from sugar, you can still make cavities. So it's really cutting out sugary foods, period. But that's good for all sorts of reasons. Okay, what about coconut oil, turmeric, or baking soda instead of toothpaste? I think if you use turmeric, your teeth would turn yellow. Don't quote me, but it's pretty staining stuff. So if you wanted yellow teeth, that might do it. But other than that, I don't know. I don't know the toothpaste composition ingredients. Or certainly I haven't run across science either way. How would cutting down on fluoride ingestion by switching water sources compare to the benefit of cleaning our produce of pesticides, assuming there is some issue at all? Is one more important than the other? Oh, that's an interesting question. Okay, so the benefits of the known or presumed benefits of cutting down fluoride ingestion is so that our fetuses in our bodies grow up to have smarter brains. And the concern about pesticides has to do with cancer risk. So it's kind of a totally different thing. And then that's cancer risk kind of for everybody, not just for pregnant people. And cleaning our produce. So I have a video talking about how much you can change pesticide levels on produce through various methods of cleaning them. It doesn't usually wash them all off, it just drops them a little bit. But even if you didn't wash them at all, the benefit from eating more fruits and vegetables vastly outweighs any potential risks from pesticide exposure, even if all you had were the most contaminated conventional produce. A tremendous benefit versus a tiny bump in risk. And so concerns about pesticides should not prevent us from stuffing our faces with as many fruits and vegetables as possible. Another question, recommendations for testing fluoride in the home. I am sure there's an industry out there that has come up where you can send off a water sample. I know you can do it for well. So this is the first time I'm living with well water, and I know we sent it off for looking at like E. coli levels and stuff. So presumably you can get sent for fluoride. There may even be like a meter you can stick into your water. That's not something I looked into. Apologize about that. All right, we are almost closed down. Let me just tell you about the new webinars coming up. All sorts of juicy topics I had to cut from the book, like sunscreen safety. I gave people a little preview. All collagen supplements. Next webinar is on osteoporosis on May 12th. Tons of new stuff I learned about osteoporosis. So stay tuned, and don't want to jinx it. We may actually be able to offer CME, continuing medical education credits for health professionals. Fingers crossed. We're working on it. So just make sure you're signed up to the NutritionFacts.org email newsletter for all the future details. Thanks, everybody, for joining me for this interesting topic. Stay safe, be kind, and eat your vegetables.